Let me tell you a little bit about how that started. So, Toby, as an undergraduate, studied math and science, but he was always really interested in these philosophical and these ethical issues. So he had read articles like Peter Singer's, and they impressed him, and he felt that he did have a moral obligation, we all have a moral obligation, to be doing a lot more for people in the developing world, for people who are living in extreme poverty. So he reports that he would tell his friends about this, he would try to engage them in debates about ethics and what we should be doing, and they kind of didn't want to have any of it. And so in order to shut him up, they would basically say, well, Toby, don't come and talk to us until you actually put your money where your mouth is and start giving all your income away. Okay, you can do this yourself. So if it really means that much to you, why aren't you giving your income away? And so they did that to shut him up. And I imagine it worked for a while. But then Toby thought, and he said, you know, they're right. If I really believe that strongly in these kind of mission, in this mission, in this kind of idea, I should be giving more close to my money. So in 2009, he sat down. I imagine him sitting down with a spreadsheet on a computer, but I don't know if that's true or not. So he sits down, and he tries to calculate how much money he needs to live on. To live a comfortable but not extravagant existence. So he thinks back, and he decides that when he was a graduate student, he was living fairly comfortably. You know, he wasn't going out to dinner every night or anything, but, you know, he was living in a decent apartment, went out to dinner every couple of weeks, went to a movie every once in a while, went to a concert every once in a while, led a good life. And so he concluded that he really didn't need any more money than that. That was 20,000 pounds a year. So he decided that he was going to donate to the developing world every dollar that he earns for the rest of his career over 20,000 pounds. He eventually lowered it to 18,000 pounds, but he started at 20,000 pounds. So every dollar over 20,000 pounds he's going to donate to charity, and he calculated that by doing this, and if you project the earnings that he expected to earn as a lecturer at Oxford, he was going to be able to donate over £1 million to charity over the course of his career. So he pledged to do that, and further decided that he was going to start an organization to encourage other people to do the same, to encourage other people to make similar commitments to give some portion of their salary to the people who need it most. So as you can expect, this generated a fair amount of publicity in the UK. And so what I want to do now is show you some of the headlines that came out after he made this pledge and publicly announced that he was starting this organization. So, Daily Mail has this headline, I will give £1 million to charity, says Oxford Don on £33,000 salary. Pretty good headline, you might read that article. BBC News, academic pledges to give away £1 million. Telegraph, Toby Ord's philosophy is one we could all learn from. The Oxford philosophy scholar who proposes to give away a third of his salary to charity has set us all an example, according to this journalist. The Guardian ran a follow-up article later. In May, we wrote about a charity where you gave away 10% of your earnings. Did anyone sign up? As Per said, the answer is yes. People did sign up. Financial Times interviewed him, and this is a quote, as an academic at Oxford University, I don't have an enormous salary, but even so, I have made a pledge to donate £1 million to charity over the course of my working life. And finally, BBC News Magazine, Toby Ord, why I'm giving £1 million to charity. Okay, so here's what I want you to notice about all these press clippings. And I promise you I didn't cherry pick these. You can go do a Google News search for Toby Ord, and you're going to get just tons more like this. Every single headline here focuses on how much Toby is giving up. So you see giving £1 million, giving 10%, giving £1 million, donating £1 million, giving away a third. Every single article focused on how much Toby is giving up. And if you think back to the examples that we talked about, that's what we focused on earlier too. We read Singer's article, and our initial reaction is, morality can't require me to give up that much. We look at celebrity giving lists. The Giving Back Fund ranks celebrities based on how much they give. Forbes ranks corporations based on how much they give in products or cash or as a percentage of profits. And we praise or do the opposite to politicians based on how much they give. So, what this points to, the general picture is that we think about charity in terms of the cost to the giver. That's the way we do it. That's the way you probably evaluate your own giving. When you think back, was I generous this year? Was I charitable this year? You think about how much money you're trying to give up. And it's the way you think about other people. We all laughed at Joe Biden because he only gave $995. But when you think about it, that's a pretty funny way to think about charity. Charity is not simply about self-sacrifice. If it was, you could be charitable or generous by taking your money out of the bank and burning it. But that wouldn't be charitable, that would be stupid. Okay? So this idea that charity is about cost to the giver just doesn't make sense. The point of charity is to help people. It's to make other people better off. And so what I want to suggest and talk about for the next half hour or so is, it seems like charity should be about the recipient. It shouldn't be about the giver. Charity isn't about how much you lose, it's about how much other people gain. The goal is to help people, not to make yourself worse off. Okay? So, I think we can see echoes of this kind of an idea in Aristotle, and as a philosopher, again, I feel compelled to mention philosophers when I can. And so here's Aristotle's view of virtue. He says that to feel or do something at the right times, with reference to the right objects, toward the right people, with the right motive, and in the right way, this is characteristic of virtue. So here's what Aristotle means by that. Think of some character trait or some kind of activity that you generally regard as a good or a virtuous one. So one example Aristotle uses that maybe is a little more appropriate in ancient Greece than today is bravery. Okay? We think that being willing to stand strong in the face of danger is generally an admirable character trait. It's a good thing. But Aristotle is going to say, well, it's only a good thing if it's done at the right times with reference to the right objects and so forth. If you're one of the 300 Spartans defending the pass against the Persians so that the rest of your army has time to regroup, that's virtuous bravery. You're standing strong in the face of danger, and you're doing so in order to accomplish something. You're enabling your comrades to get back and mount a second stand later. That's virtuous bravery. But if the other 299 Spartans run and you're the last guy left, then standing strong in the face of the Persians, that's not brave, that's foolhardy, that's dumb. Okay? You are standing strong in the face of danger, so there's a sense in which it's brave, but it's idiotic. You're not accomplishing anything. That's not virtuous bravery, that's stupidity. So, you can see this attitude towards most things that we tend to regard as good character traits. Think of ambition. People usually praise each other for being ambitious. It's a good thing to set goals, set your sights high and try to accomplish them. That's a good thing. But does that mean we think ambition is always a good thing, no matter what? Of course not. There are certain kinds of goals you shouldn't set for yourself, and there are certain kinds of ways you shouldn't achieve goals. If the way you climb the corporate ladder is by lying and cheating and stealing, that's not an acceptable way to be ambitious. Then your ambition is not a virtue, it's a vice. So this is Aristotle's idea, and I think we can apply it to the case of generosity. We all agree generosity, charitable giving, these things are virtues. Of course they are. But, taking off from Aristotle, we can say that truly virtuous giving is about more than self-sacrifice. It involves giving to the right people, in the right way, at the right time, all those things that Aristotle said. I said earlier that it seems sensible to think of charity in terms of the recipient, not in terms of the giver. And so one of the elements, I think, that goes in to all these little clauses that Aristotle adds is we need to be looking at what is being done with the money. What are you accomplishing with the money? That's one element of virtuous giving. What you accomplish, not simply what you give up. So, we can see echoes of this Aristotelian idea in the giving what we can pledge that Per mentioned earlier. And this is why I'm very happy to be able to come and speak today on behalf of the organization. So here's the pledge. I recognize that I can use part of my income to do a significant amount of good in the developing world. Since I can live well enough on a smaller income, I pledge that from today until the day I retire, I shall give at least 10% of what I earn to whichever organizations can most effectively use it to fight poverty in developing countries. I make this pledge freely, openly, and without regret. So there are many Aristotelian echoes in that pledge that I'm not going to go through. You can find them for yourself, which is actually interesting because Toby Ord is not an Aristotelian, and the other founders of the group are not Aristotelians. I'm just going to focus on the two key parts of the pledge, the two things that you would be agreeing to do if you decided that you wanted to take this pledge. First, you'd be pledging to give 10%. That's the obvious thing, and as we saw, that's the thing everybody focuses on. It's probably what you focused on when you first saw that. You're like, wow, that's a lot of money to give up. But the other thing that you're promising to do is you're promising to give that 10% to whichever organizations can most effectively use it to fight poverty in developing countries. So we have these two parts of the pledge. We've seen everybody focuses on this first part. But I'm going to convince you for the rest of this talk that the second part of the pledge is much, much, much more important than the first part of the pledge. By that I mean, there's much more virtue in taking the second part of the pledge than in taking the first part of the pledge. You can do a lot more good by taking the second part of the pledge than taking the first part of the pledge. If I had to choose, you're all going to either take the first part or the second part of the pledge. I would easily pick the second part. So let me explain why that is. Before I get there, though, let me just throw out some statistics so we can see the baseline, the level of charitable giving in the United States that we're all working from. So, in the United States, annually, we give about $290 billion to charity. That's about 2% of GDP. 73% of that comes from individuals, which some people find surprising. They think that it's corporations or foundations that do most of the giving. They do give a significant amount, but individuals make up the lion's share of this charitable giving. And it's hard to come up with good estimates of how much people give on average, but the estimates range from about 2 to 4% of household income, with 2.5% being the figure that most people seem to cite. So I'm going to assume that people give on average about 2.5% in the United States. How many people give? About 2/3 of households give, and you can see the amounts there, but people who are more highly educated tend to give more. So 82% of people with a bachelor's degree give to charity, give something to charity, and you can see the averages here. So everybody in this room, I can expect, or at least 82% of you, are going to end up giving something to charity most years. What's important for our purposes, something Per mentioned earlier, a little bit less than 1/3 of giving in the United States specifically targets the poor. And this actually doesn't mean the global poor, this just means the poor wherever they are in the United States or elsewhere. So, this is the kind of baseline level of giving that we're working with in the United States. But I'm at UC San Diego today, so let's look at what you guys can expect to give. So I went to this website, payscale.com. I don't know if you guys know about it, and you can look up the average starting salaries for graduates of different universities. And if you didn't know this, congratulations, UCSD does very, very well on this measure. You're in the top 10 for public universities in the United States. So people who graduate UCSD with a bachelor's degree, we're not talking about graduate degrees, this is the median starting salary, $48,000 a year, even in a recession. So that's pretty impressive. And the median mid-career salary is twice that, $96,000. So that's what you can expect to make. But we said charity, generosity is not simply about how much you make. So we got to look at what you're going to give and further what you can do with that. So let's first look at what you're going to give. If you give at the average American rate, 2.5%, that means that when you graduate, you're going to be giving about $1,200 annually. And middle of your career, you're going to be giving twice that, about $2,400. So since we're taking this recipient-focused view, let's see what you can accomplish with, I'll just pick this $2,400 figure. Let's see what that money is going to do. So there's our $2,400. We saw that most people use about 1/3 of it to target the poor. So I'm going to assume that you earmark 1/3 of your charitable giving for poverty relief. That's $800. Well, what are you going to do with it? Let's suppose that you went to a talk like this at some point in the past and you realize that the global poor are much poorer than the American poor. And so you decide that you're going to use this money internationally. You read about a wonderful organization called the Global Fund. They are dedicated, their mission is to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria, which are 3 of the biggest global health problems out there. So let's say that you give that $800 to the Global Fund, and you give it to their AIDS fund. Okay? $800 to the Global Fund to fight AIDS. Now, what the Global Fund does with money that it gets to fight AIDS is it uses that money to provide antiretrovirals to HIV positive and AIDS patients in sub-Saharan Africa who otherwise couldn't afford any treatment. Now, I spent a little bit of time working at an institute that does this kind of cost-effectiveness research, and it turns out that we can study this, and it costs the Global Fund about $400 to provide a year's worth of treatment to somebody. Okay? Now, this figure should strike you as a very impressive one. I don't know if you know anybody who's HIV positive in the United States, but if you do, think about how much their medications cost. It's a lot more than $400 a year. And in fact, their co-pays are probably a lot more than $400 a year. So this is an impressive figure, and it's even more impressive when you realize this is the kind of all-inclusive out-the-door price. This includes the medications, but it also includes the cost of getting the medications where they need to go. It includes the cost of medical workers to administer the medications, to run the tests, to figure out what cocktail you're supposed to give to what person, follow-up visits. All of that is included in this $400 for a year of treatment. So that's pretty good. So what that means, you donated $800, $400 buys a year of treatment. So your $800 has bought 2 years of treatment, which will extend someone's life by at least 2 years. Okay?